Welcome to the East Bay Regional Park Districts along the Bayshore exploring the king tides. Our naturalists are out in the field. We will be visiting with 3 naturalists spread across our parks over the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. The conditions out in the field are what they may be. So we may be dealing with a little bit of wind. We may be dealing with a little bit of water. And depending upon connectivity, we're going to be flexible. As we go, we want to have a chance to explain what the king tides are and explore why they're important to us right now. So those king tides, they are the highest high tides of the year. And we all have an idea about tides. Tides go in and out. We generally have 2 high tides a day, 2 low tides a day. They are caused by the moon and by the rotation of the earth and how that all interacts. In real quick and easy form, if we take a look at this squishy ball, off to the side, we have our moon. And the moon, the gravity of the moon starts pulling on the tides. And as it pulls on the tides, the ball squishes down. But when you notice, it squishes on both sides. So those 2 high tides are found at the moon and across, at the side facing the moon and across from it, with the low tides being on the other ends. In addition to this, if you add it to the solar tides, so the sun is also pulling its gravity, and if you add the lunar tide and the solar tide behind it, you get a much, much larger tide. In addition to those 2 things, as the sun goes around, as the earth goes around the sun, and as the moon goes around the earth, there's a portion of time where the earth is closer to the sun and when the moon is closer to the earth. That has to do with the elliptical orbits of those. When that occurs, and you have the earth being closest to the sun and the moon being closest to the earth, and the moon and the sun in line with each other, pulling on those waters, then you get the highest high tides of the year. And annually, this tends to happen in December and January. Right now, we are at one of those king tides, those highest high tides of the year. The reason why they're so important right now is that they give us a visual clue as to what we can expect with rising sea level due to climate change. What is currently the highest high tide of the year will one day potentially be the average high tide. So as we go and we look at our shorelines, we can see what the future might hold. And we can also see some of what East Bay Regional Park District and our communities has started to do to be able to address and move forward with this reality of rising sea levels. Enough of me talking, though. I'm going to have a chance to pass it over to our first stop. We're going to see Pia, Naturalist Pia Loft, down at Crab Cove and Crown Beach Regional Shoreline. Pia?
Thank you, Kevin. Hi, everyone. My name is Pia. I'm a naturalist at the Crab Cove Visitor Center in Alameda, which is a Lonely Land. And today I am at Crown Beach, the longest stretch of sandy beach in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it's one of your East Bay Regional Parks. Kevin, if you could put the map of our East Bay parks onto the screen so we can show where Crown Beach is, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, I have a slide right here. So this is a map of our East Bay parks. Oh, there we go. It's on the screen. That dark green represents your East Bay Regional Parks. We have 73 of them. And that yellow circle, that is exactly where Crown Beach is. Now today we are experiencing the highest tide, or one of the highest tides of the year, the king tide. And we can take off the image so we can look at our high tide here at Crown Beach. Alrighty. Since we look, our tide is really, really high. It's our king tide. It is predicted to be 8 feet taller than the average low tide. So I'm 5'1". If I put my hand up, that makes me about 6.5 feet tall. If I jump, that makes me 8 feet. So this king tide is predicted to be 8 feet taller than the average low tide. But that does not mean that it's only 8 extra feet of beach. in fact, it's going to be a big, big difference. That's why we're looking at king tide to see what's going to happen with sea level rise. Kevin, if you could share the picture of a low tide here at Crown Beach so we can see the big difference. I also have a picture right here of a low tide. See that yellow arrow? That is showing the difference between a low tide and then we see the king tide up here today. It's a difference of 600 feet. So that is why we're going to look at king tides and figure out why it matters to look at them. So before I get started on sea level rise here at Crown Beach, let's make sure that we're all on the same page with what sea level rise even means. So if you're familiar with the term, write that down in the chat. If you know what sea level rise means, write it down in the chat. If you feel comfortable explaining to somebody else what sea level rise means, put that in the chat. And if this is your very first time hearing what sea level rise is, don't worry, we're going to do a quick explanation so that we're all on the same page. Because if we know what the causes of sea level rise are, then we can be the solution and we can work together to stop sea level rise and protect our parks and our communities. So sea level rise is caused by climate change. We, as humans, are releasing a whole bunch of carbon dioxide or extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is basically that invisible blanket made out of gases surrounding planet Earth. And so when we burn fossil fuels like coal and natural gases and oil, like these three items right here, to drive our boats, to drive our planes, to drive our cars, or to make electricity that runs our homes, our communities, our schools, when we burn that fossil fuel, we are emitting a whole lot of extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The problem is carbon dioxide is a heat trapping gas. So it traps in heat. So when we release more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it's like we're adding extra layers of heat trapping blankets. And what happens when you have too many blankets on? You get too hot. And that's exactly what's starting to happen with our planet. Our planet is getting too hot. Our planet is seeing its temperatures rise. And that's causing two problems with sea level rise, or it's causing sea level rise in two ways. The first way that it's causing sea level rise is that it's melting glaciers. So glaciers are the snow on land that have accumulated over years and years and years and turned into ice. Here we see a picture of a typical glacier. Notice that this ice, the snow, is on land. And we have glaciers in California. We have glaciers here in the Sierra Nevada, up here in Northern California with Mount Lassen, Mount Shasta, and Trinity Alps. So we have glaciers in California. We also have glaciers all around the world. They make up about 10% of all the land mass on the planet. So it's a pretty big chunk. Now, what happens when you rise the temperature with ice and snow? It starts to melt, it starts to turn into liquid water. And that liquid water starts going into the ocean. So we're adding extra water into the ocean, and the ocean is starting to rise. So that's the first cause of sea level rise. But then to make things worse, that rising temperatures, those warming temperatures are also making that water in the ocean. You heat up water, water starts to take up more space, more volume. So that's the reason why climate change is causing sea level rise. The warming temperatures are adding extra water from the glaciers into the ocean, and then that water is also taking up more space than it usually would. And that's a big problem for coastal communities like the San Francisco Bay Area. Here's a map, a density map of the San Francisco Bay. We see here we have San Francisco, here we have San Jose, here we have Oakland, up here we have Antioch. And you notice that the yellow, where there's more and more, the most people live just within a few miles of impacts in two major ways. The first one is that we're seeing floods. So all that extra water in the Pacific Ocean is coming into the San Francisco Bay as well. Our bay is higher, And so water is going into our lower areas. Here we have a map where we can kind of see where that extra water is going. It's going into San Jose, Fremont, Hayward, Oakland, up here in Richmond, and then on the coast up here with Antioch and Oakley. So all that additional water is starting to get into our neighborhoods. It's starting to get into our businesses, our schools, our homes, but it's also starting to get into our infrastructures like roads or trains like BARTs. So even though the flooding is just happening on the shoreline, it's having a big impact on the entire community. Imagine if someone is living in Fremont and trying to get to work in Berkeley and the BART is not working, they might not be able to make it to work. So that's the first major impact, are those floods. The second major impact is shoreline erosion. So higher waves from sea level rise have more force, they have more impact, they have more strength. So they can take away rocks, they can take away soil, they can take away sand off of our coastline and take it away. And so our shore starts getting smaller and smaller. And this is exactly what happened with Crown Beach. So here we have, I'm standing in front of the California Board Sports building. You see it's very, very close to the water. Well, 3 years ago, it was not that close. Let me find a picture so we can tell the difference between 3 years ago and what is happening right now. Aha, I have the picture. If you see a picture of this California sports building, notice this little shower head right here. There's a big difference, a lot of room, at least 20 feet between this shower head and the water. Well, after that last big storm on Halloween, we lost so much beach that the shower head is now here, right on the shoreline. So we lost about 15 feet of ground, of soil, because of shoreline erosion. And it's being made so much worse because of sea level rise, because those waves are so much stronger when they have that extra height. Now, this is a really big problem for these kinds of buildings, for buildings on the shoreline. This particular building, the California Board Sports building, its infrastructure, its foundation, its pipes are going to be damaged by the next big storm after that October 24th storm. So Park District employees got together with outside agencies and hurried to get an emergency permit to do a shoreline embankment stabilization. Try to say that 5 times fast. Shoreline embankment stabilization. Whoa, it's hard. It's basically a little rock wall. So you see the rocks right behind me? Those are big rocks. They're put in place there to stop the erosion. So they're stopping the waves from taking the little sand, the little soil, the little rocks away from the coastline. So this is a wonderful, wonderful emergency situation or solution. These rocks are preventing any further damage to the building, but it is a temporary solution. So right now, district managers, district engineers are working with outside organizations to figure out the best way for a long-term plan to sea level rise. So they might be bringing in extra sand. They might be planting plants whose roots can act as soil nets and stop erosion. They're looking at all the different possibilities to find the best solution for Crown Beach specifically, because each beach or each park is a unique place. So they each have their own set of challenges, of unique challenges. And that's why we're going to go check out the other parks and see what they are doing to stop sea level rise or to mitigate sea level rise. After we check out the other parks, we're also going to talk about solutions of what we can do as community members and as individuals to stop climate change and stop sea level rise and protect our parks and our communities. Alrighty, I'm going to give it back to Kevin. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your parks.
Thank you, Pia. And that's a great transition as we are now going up to Point Pinole, and we're going to have a chance to see another solution that East Bay Regional Park District has done with Naturalist Trent.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Hey, everyone. I'm Naturalist Trent Pierce. I work up at the Tilden Nature Area, and today I'm coming at you live from the Dotson Family Marsh in Richmond. And I just want to say this King Tide event is crazy. When I set my tripod up about half an hour ago, the water was like 6 or 7 feet farther back. So I'm actually a little worried that I'm going to get totally flooded out while I'm standing here talking. Hopefully not. I'm going to keep my eye on it. So I'm here today at Dotson Family Marsh to show you that the impacts of sea level rise can be mitigated with wetland restoration. This is kind of the opposite of what's happening at Crab Cove, where they're trying to keep the ocean back. Here at Dotson Family Marsh, the ocean is allowed to come in. And this whole place was designed specifically for it. Break it down for you. So wetlands, like Dotson Family Marsh, act as sponges to slow down the impacts of sea level rise. Let me explain that too. They've got special soils. I've got some right here. Check it out. So this is Novato soil. It's from the marsh. I just scooped it out a few minutes ago. It's a mix of deposited minerals and decomposing plant remains. And it smells really bad. And that's all the decomposing plant remains. That's part of the reason that people think marshes are really gross. It's because they're full of this really stinky soil, but it's actually super nutrient rich. It provides a great place for marsh plants to grow, and it also absorbs water really well. So that's the first part, the soil. Then we've got the plants that grow here in the wetlands. And the cool thing is they organize themselves by how much salt water they're exposed to. Have some pieces right here. The bottom level of the marsh, which is completely underwater, is made up of cordgrass. Cordgrass is a plant that can tolerate being completely submerged in salt water. And that's a good thing because it's completely submerged today. We can't even see it. It's way out there behind me. It's under the water. The next level of the marsh has a couple kinds of plants. One of them is called saltgrass. It's this plant right here. That's saltgrass. The other one is pickleweed. Now, these are two plants that don't mind being flooded, but they also want to dry out every once in a while. So they can be flooded by the ocean, and then they want to dry out. So this is the medium level of the marsh. And at the top level, we have plants like gum plant, which is this really cool kind of bigger bush. I'll show you some. It's right here behind me. Let me pan down to it. See that bush right there? That's gum plant. And I've got a little piece of it right here. So this is gum plant. This is a plant that doesn't want to really be flooded. It's okay being sprayed by the ocean, but it doesn't want to be underwater. Okay, so together these plants make up the different levels of the marsh, right? And they're all based in that goopy soil. And what they all do together, the soil absorbs water really well, and then all these different plants that are organized along the different heights of the marsh sort of buffer the water as it comes in. So they absorb water and they slow down wave action, which protects the coastline from erosion. And it can also protect things like buildings and roads. Let me just switch my cameras. This is looking behind me right now. Look at all the buildings back there. That white building is an Amazon distribution center where we get all of our stuff that we order on the internet from. And it's really close to the ocean right now, but it's protected from the king tide by this marsh. So that's the marsh in action. It's working right now. It's the soil and the plants are absorbing this massive king tide event. And don't worry, I'm going to show you more cool marsh scenes in just a minute. While many wetlands have been destroyed in California and around the world, it's not too late to rebuild them. So over the past 150 years, we've lost around 90% of the San Francisco Bay Area's wetlands, mostly to infill and development. Again, people used to think marshes were these gross things. They were smelly, they're really muddy, you can't walk in, you can't do anything with them. And so they would just take soil from inland and fill them in and make them flat ground and then build buildings on them and roads and stuff, right? But now we're learning that they're actually really important to protect those buildings and roads that are further inland from things like rising sea levels and king tide events, right? And where I'm standing right now, Dotson Family Marsh, was once infilled land with multiple buildings and a model airplane runway, which is crazy. Kevin, could you cue up those 5 images that I have? I'm going to show you some satellite photos, hopefully in just a minute, that show the change in time over this place. Okay, and Kevin, we're just going to run through these all together so you can stay on this. So it used to be called Bruner Marsh, and that was the person who owned it back in the day. And here's an aerial photo from 2002. There's the model airplane runway. It's the long, dark strip kind of in the middle left. And you can see there's a bunch of buildings around the coast, and it's all just scratched up and filled in land. All right, click on to the next one. Let's see what we got. Oh, the next slide, Kevin. You can just stay on these. All right, so here is Bruner Marsh in April 2015. The Park District, East Bay Regional Parks, purchased this land in 2009 and came up with a plan to convert it back into not just a wetland, but a wetland that had climate change resiliency built in. So we built a specific wetland to survive rising sea levels. Okay, so this is April 2015. Go to that next photo there, Kevin. Let's see how it's changing as the Park District started working on it. So this is, you can see some channels have been cut into the marsh here, and that's to allow the ocean back into the land. So that's changing infill back into a marsh. Those dark lines snaking in, let water from the bay come into the marsh. And go ahead and go to the next one, Kevin. Good enough. This photo or this image shows you how the marsh is designed. So the top little graphic there is the sea level today. Not today, because today is actually like the bottom one, but on a normal non-king tide day, this is what Dotson Family Marsh looks like. So again, there are these different levels of marsh, low, medium, high, transition zone. And we've got what we call uplands, which are kind of like grassy meadows. And the trails are on the top. They're the highest part of the marsh, right? And then the bottom image there, that is projected sea level rise in the year 2080. And you can see the marsh has changed. The high marsh has become low marsh. Low marsh has become mud flats. And the transition zone has moved inland, right? It's moving away from the ocean. So this is really cool. And Kevin, you can go ahead and close that down. Thank you for sharing those images. Folks, this is really cool because this marsh was built not only to absorb wave energy from the ocean and absorb oncoming water, but to give those plants that I just showed you room to migrate uphill, right? Because salt water is really kind of poison for a lot of plants, even some of these that grow right next to it. They don't want to be flooded all the time. And so this marsh was built so that they have a chance to escape. They can move upland and inland as the oceans rise. And so now the cool part is today's King Tide event is a glimpse into the future of the Bay Area, because we were literally seeing what the ocean is going to be like and the bay is going to be like, you know, in 40 years or 60 years today. This is what it's going to look like. So I'm going to switch over cameras here, and I'm just going to give you a little pan of what I'm seeing. So here's the trail, and you can see it is high and dry, right? Trail is nowhere near the water today. Even though we're at a 7.5-foot tide out here, that is crazy high. The trail is fine. This is the kind of upland area. And now I'm panning into the transition zone. That's gum plant, those bushes growing there. And now right on the water's edge, we're getting into the saltgrass and pickleweed. And all of this water, this is all normally dry land. If you come out here on a non-king tide day, all of this land is above water. So this is kind of amazing to see this much water in this marsh. And yet it doesn't feel flooded. It doesn't feel like it's a catastrophe or anything bad is happening. It feels like it's just a normal day in the Dotson Family Marsh. So all of this land that's flooded is doing just fine, right? And this is the crazy part. Here's a little bridge with some graffiti, and you can't see it because it's completely underwater, but there are two big pipes in there that connect this side of the marsh with the side on the other trail. And since I've been standing here just for the past 30 minutes, those have completely flooded and are underwater. So we're still on a flood tide. The tide is still coming in. I don't know if you can see, it's kind of pushing up against that wall just a little bit, right? But again, this is what a coastal wetland looks like that is designed to withstand rising sea levels. Nothing bad is going to happen out here because this place was made specifically for events like this. So really, this marsh is working proof that we can solve some of the impacts of sea level rise with wetland restoration. We've just got to find more places to do it. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Kevin in the Black Diamond studio. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Trent. And yes, we are still working to find more places to do mitigation like this, building more wetlands, restoring the wetlands that we have. And as we look at that, we are now going to be heading down towards Coyote Hills to Mayron, and let her tell us a little bit about what's happening down there.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm Mayron. I'm a naturalist at Coyote Hills Park, and I'm on the ancestral lands of the Tui Boon Ohlone peoples. Now, we've been talking today all about our king tides and these rising sea levels, and what the parks are doing to really slow down these impacts of rising sea levels. So we'll be talking about that and what we're doing specifically at Coyote Hills. But first, I wanted to tell you all a little bit about the area that I'm in right now. We've been talking about how important wetlands and marshes are, and here at Coyote Hills, there are many acres of marshes. So stretching all the way behind me on this trail are all of our marshes. Now, marshes are such important ecosystems. They clean our waters. They act as a nursery for a lot of baby animals. And here at Coyote Hills, a lot of water coming in from the cities come into our marsh and actually connect back to Alameda Creek, which I want to show you is right on the side of me over here. Now, at this spot right here, Alameda Creek is actually connecting right into the San Francisco Bay. And that is right over of freshwater and saltwater here. Off in the distance over here, you can see the Dumbarton Bridge. And then over on the side over here too, these rolling peaks that are part of Coyote Hills too. So here I am pretty much at the end of our Alameda Creek Trail, pretty much surrounded by the bay. So we've been focusing on our king tides today, and right at this moment, or pretty close, is the highest tide level here at Coyote Hills. And we've been talking about how important wetlands are to really slowing down the impacts of sea level rise. So I want to go ahead and walk into part of our marsh wetlands over here and show you some of the plants that we have and kind of the rising sea levels over here. So now I'll just pan over this way. Now I was looking here just a little while ago, so you can see how high those levels are. And I'm going to take you on this path actually over here too. And let's see, hopefully you all can see that. Here, I'm going to zoom you around so you get a panoramic. Aha. Now, right over here on this path, I was just walking here and there was actually no water on this path over here. So you can see again how high these sea levels are and kind of coming over this path into this other area over here. And really how important these wetlands are to really slowing down those impacts of sea level rise. Now, there are a lot of plants that you can find in these marshes and wetlands. And again, having these wetland restoration projects, which we are having here at Coyote Hills, is really important. And having these native plants here to really do their jobs. Now, I was mentioning that this specific area, we have freshwater and saltwater mixing. And we do have plants here too that as part of their job is to absorb some of this salt and prevent that from really going into these freshwater areas. So I want to highlight two plants really quickly and talk about a special animal too. All right, so we're going to come a little closer and you're going to have to down a little bit with me. So one plant that I wanted to highlight was alkali heath. And I'll kind of zoom down here a little bit. And you'll kind of notice I'm actually stepping in water right now. So this is our plant alkali heath over here. This is a plant that can absorb salt. And sometimes if you take your hand and kind of rub it on it, you can actually see salt deposits on your hands. Great. Another plant that I wanted to highlight that Trent was talking about also are pickleweed. So here is some close-ups of our pickleweed over here. Pickleweed can absorb salt from the waters, and you can kind of see how they have these reddish tips on them. They store salt in these special vacuums, or vacuoles, I should say. And once they're ready, full of salt, they'll turn kind of reddish like this. And that means they're just basically decomposing or dying and ready to come off too. Now, there's a special plant, or special animal, I should say, that loves these types of habitats. And I would be remiss without mentioning the salt marsh harvest mouse. So all of these plants and animals are impacted by sea level rise. So everything that we can do to kind of slow down these effects are great for these plants and these animals that call these ecosystems home. Now we're gonna go kind of across the bay over here. Don't worry, there's a trail. And I wanted to show you something else that we're doing here at Coyote Hills, again, to slow down the impacts of sea level rise. Now, I should mention with pickleweed also, that pickleweed is also known as sea asparagus. Does anybody like asparagus out there? And it is edible. What do you think it tastes like? You guessed it, it's salty. All right, so one of the other things that we're doing here at Coyote Hills, slow down the impacts of sea level rise, are to create levees. So I'm gonna pan out here, and straight out into the bay, you'll see these elevated areas. Now, these are made of natural materials, of different sediments and soils that really stop water from flowing from one area to another. Now, you can see that this is coming right up against these areas, so it can prevent flooding. So it's really important to have levees like this, and one of the things that we're doing here at Coyote Hills. Now, while these are made of natural materials, levees can be kind of artificially made, meaning that humans can create them, and that's what we're doing here. But there are also natural levees too. If you're ever kind of on a creek or kind of on a riverbed, the natural flow of water is moving sediment up, and it's creating kind of these barriers that really diverting water, keeping the flow of water. So these levees are really great things to have to really prevent flooding in areas, and again, prevent the impacts of sea level rise. So those are a few things that we have here at Coyote Hills, and there's a lot of things that you can do also. We were talking about earlier how really sea level rise is really one of the impacts of climate change. So anything that we can do to reduce our carbon footprint is great for the environment. So we have all of these great trails that we've been talking about in your East Bay parks. And anything that you can do, walking, biking, getting out there, that lessens kind of the fuel emissions from cars is great. And we're working with local transit too to make sure that there are more areas that you can connect directly from trails to places that you need to go to reduce these emissions. Reducing your waste is also really great for the environment too. So I'm sure a lot of you have your reusable water bottles, straws, bags, all of those are wonderful, and more of those individual actions. And even thinking about where you get your food, getting your food locally, going to your local farmers markets really reduces the fuel that you need to transport food from place to place. So those are really good individual actions that all of us do. I'm sure a lot of you do these things already and continue to do. We're doing a lot of wetland restoration here at Coyote Hills, and we're planting a lot of native plants. These plants can absorb a lot of these different emissions, and then of course create habitat for a lot of our native animals too. Now, something really interesting, if you've ever visited Coyote Hills, that we're doing a lot of grassland management, these kind of natural-based solutions. So if you visited Coyote Hills, maybe you've seen some sheep on our hillsides. These animals are grazing on these dead and dying plant materials too. So that's kind of a natural solution to getting rid of dead plant material that could really be fuel for fires, as opposed to having this heavy machinery that is emitting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. So we have a lot of different solutions that we're doing here at Coyote Hills and as a community, and some that we can do individually. And this can all help kind of slow down the effects of climate change and sea level rise. And then I'll just give you kind of one more glimpse here at these high levels. And I wanted to show you this boardwalk too. Now, just a little while ago, you can see kind of this wooden measurement on the side. Wasn't quite as high before we were having our king tides, but again, with all of these community and individual solutions, we are really working towards slowing down the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. All right, that is it for me here at Coyote Hills. I'm going to turn it back to you, Kevin, at the studio.
Thank you, Mayron. And thank you for talking a little bit about some of the other things that we are doing across the park district as well. East Bay Regional Park District has what we refer to as our Climate Smart Initiative, which is our commitment to finding out solutions and implementing solutions to help to protect our parks and our communities from the changing climates. A few of those things that we are working on right now, you got a chance to see some of the different solutions for wetland management that's happening, recreating wetlands. This afternoon, we'll have a chance to explore some of the parks going up into the Delta as well. And you'll be able to see more during that program, which starts at 1 o'clock. We also have a initiative right now to try to switch as many of our small tools over to electric tools as we can. And we're piloting that in certain parks to be able to minimize some of the emissions that are being created. And of course, our parklands have lots of plants like Mayron was talking about. And those plants can act as a carbon sink. They can be involved in what's known as carbon sequestration, pulling carbon out of the air, trying to break down that blanket that Pia was talking about and locking it up and holding it for a longer period of time to minimize the rising temperatures that are creating climate change. So the more plants, the more of our parklands that are able to be protected and preserved, the larger of a carbon sink we are creating, which is helping our communities and helping the planet as a whole. In addition, a few years ago, about 5 years ago, East Bay Regional Park District opened up a new solar panel array at Shadow Cliffs Regional Park. And the electricity generated from that solar panel array offsets about 90% of all of the electrical use that the park district creates across all 73 of our regional parks. Currently, that amount of electricity being created through those solar panels is the equivalent of approximately 160,000 trees being planted with regards to the amount of carbon that's been removed from the environment. As we look towards our future, taking a look at these rising sea levels that we see during our king tides, it shows us a glimpse of what the future might hold. But today, as we've explored our parks, it also has given us an opportunity to see what some of those solutions could be and are that we as a park district and as a community with all of your help are starting to do and starting to create. Only together will we be able to address climate change on a larger scale. Some of those are larger efforts. Large-scale restoration work takes a lot of time, some planning, and an awful lot of work. Some of those are smaller things, some of the things that Mayron mentioned. Even things like composting at your house can be a large help. Every once in a while, our colleagues down at Ardenwood Historic Farm have some great programs about how to compost, so keep an eye out for those. There's also opportunities where you can join us to go out into the parks and to volunteer to help with some of these projects, help with cleanups, help with things to remove trash from the parks or plant new trees. If you want to get involved, go onto our website, www.ebparks.org, and click the Get Involved portion. It's under Things to Do and then Get Involved, and our volunteer opportunities are all listed there. And finally, if you want to see what areas closer to your house look like during these king tide events, and you haven't been able to get out and see them in person, if you, or if you have gotten out to see them and you have photos, you can also upload them to a citizen science project that's run by the California Coastal Commission. This is known as the California King Tides Project. And it's a place where people upload photos from around the bay for what they are seeing so that you can see what your area nearby your house and your community starts to look like. And it goes back a number of years. These king tide projects started in 2007 in Australia and have now spread across the world. So we really are starting to get a much more holistic view of what the future can hold. I want to thank you all very much for joining us today as we go out and to explore the parks. And I want to thank our naturalists for being out there in the weather. I know some of us are starting to get a little wet, drenched in the rain, but people want to jump on and say goodbye. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's a fantastic event. So even though it's raining, if you have an opportunity, get out and check out these king tides. They're really amazing.
Thanks, everyone. Come and check out Crown Beach, especially at low tide, because king tides bring that for the year. So in 6 hours, about 6 hours, you can come and check out our in the tide pools. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'll give you one last look at our rising sea levels. And again, kind of this overflowing levee over here too. So hopefully you can get out into your parks and observe these rising sea levels also, or the king tides, I should say. All right, bye everyone.
Thank you all, and we hope to see you out in your East Bay Regional Park District parks very soon.